My husband, 33M, cheated on me, 24F. Lila sat alone in the cozy living room, the soft glow of the fireplace casting flickering shadows on the walls. The warmth of the room did little to comfort her. Instead, it served as a stark contrast to the cold knot of anxiety tightening in her chest. For months now, something had felt off. Mark, her husband of 4 years, had become distant, his once loving demeanor replaced by a cold, almost indifferent attitude. Late nights at work, canceled plans, and the way he seemed to pull away from her in bed had all added up to a growing sense of dread that she could no longer ignore. Mark moved in the background, hurriedly packing a small duffel bag. His actions were brisk, almost nervous, as if he couldn't wait to get out of the house. Lila watched him, her mind swirling with doubts and fears, but she couldn't bring herself to confront him, at least not yet. She needed proof, something concrete to explain the sinking feeling in her stomach. Mark turned to her, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Hey, babe, I'll be heading out soon. The guys are already waiting for me. Don't stay up too late, okay?" he said, trying to sound casual, but the tension in his voice was unmistakable. Lila nodded mechanically, her eyes fixed on the flames in the fireplace. She couldn't even bring herself to look at him, afraid that her gaze might betray the storm of emotions brewing inside her. As the front door closed behind him, the silence in the house became deafening. Lila sat still for a moment, listening to the sound of her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. She knew she couldn't go on like this. Living in a constant state of fear and suspicion, she had to know the truth, no matter how much it hurt. Determined, Lila rose from the couch and walked purposefully to Mark's study. Her hands trembled slightly as she began to search through his things, opening drawers and rifling through papers. She felt a pang of guilt for invading his privacy, but the gnawing doubt in her mind left her no choice. After a few minutes of searching, she found what she was looking for, an old phone, tucked away in the back of a drawer. The screen was cracked, but when she powered it on, it still worked. Her heart pounded as she waited for the phone to boot up, a million thoughts racing through her mind. "Please let me be wrong," she thought. "Please let me be imagining things." But as the phone came to life, Lila's worst fears were confirmed. Messages began to flood the screen, messages that weren't meant for her. She scrolled through them, her breath catching in her throat as she saw pictures of Mark kissing another woman. They were from a trip he had taken to Chicago with friends, or at least that's what he had told her. Now she knew the truth. He wasn't just on a fishing trip. He was with her, the other woman, right now. Lila felt her world shatter into a million pieces as she continued to read the messages. They were filled with affection and longing, words that Mark used to say to her, but now they were directed at someone else. "I miss you. I can't wait to see you," the messages repeated over and over, each one a dagger to her heart. The realization hit her like a tidal wave. Mark wasn't the man she thought he was, and their marriage wasn't the perfect story she had believed in for so long. As the full weight of the betrayal settled in, Lila's hands tightened around the phone, her knuckles white with the effort. Her body shook with a mix of anger, disbelief, and heartbreak. The woman he was with wasn't a stranger. She was someone Lila had met before, someone she had even hung out with at a work event. The betrayal cut even deeper, knowing that this woman had smiled in her face, all while carrying on an affair with her husband. In that moment, Lila felt completely and utterly alone, standing in the middle of the study that suddenly felt like a stranger's room. The walls seemed to close in around her as the enormity of what she had discovered overwhelmed her. Everything she had once believed in, her marriage, her husband, their future, was now tainted by the ugly truth of Mark's infidelity. The next morning, Lila sat in the same spot on the couch, her eyes red and puffy from a night spent crying. She hadn't slept at all, her mind replaying the messages and pictures she had found on Mark's old phone. The shock had faded, but the pain remained, a dull, constant ache in her chest. Every fiber of her being felt exhausted, Yet she knew she couldn't avoid what was coming. She had to confront Mark, to hear him admit to what he had done, even if it meant breaking her heart all over again. The sound of the front door creaking open snapped her out of her daze. Mark stepped inside, carrying the same duffel bag he had left with the night before. His expression was cheerful, almost as if nothing had happened. He hadn't noticed Lila's tear-streaked face or the tightness in her posture as she sat rigid on the couch. He tried to maintain the facade of normalcy, oblivious to the storm that was about to hit. "Hey babe, I'm back. It was a great trip. We caught so many fish, you wouldn't believe it," he said with forced enthusiasm, dropping the duffel bag by the door and walking towards her. He leaned in to kiss her, but she recoiled, turning her head away. Mark froze, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. "Lila? What's wrong?" Lila's eyes locked onto his, and in that moment, the dam holding back all her anger, hurt, and betrayal broke. Her voice, trembling with emotion, cut through the silence. "What's wrong?" "You want to know what's wrong, Mark? I know everything." The color drained from Mark's face as he realized what she meant. His eyes darted around the room as if searching for an escape, but there was none. He was trapped, and he knew it. "Lila, I can explain." "Explain?" Lila interrupted, her voice rising. "Explain what? How you've been lying to me for months? How you've been sneaking around with her while I've been sitting here trusting you? I found your phone, Mark. I saw the pictures, the messages. I know you were with her last night, not on some stupid fishing trip." Mark took a step back, his hands raised defensively. "Lila, please, just let me—" "No, you don't get to explain this away," Lila shouted, her voice cracking. Tears welled up in her eyes again, but she refused to let them fall. "You lied to me, Mark. You betrayed me. I gave you everything, and this is how you repay me?" With lies and deceit, Mark's shoulders slumped as the weight of his actions pressed down on him. He had no defense, no way to justify what he had done. He had betrayed the woman who loved him, and now he was watching that love crumble before his eyes. "I'm sorry, Lila. I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you." Lila let out a bitter laugh, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Sorry? You're sorry? That doesn't even begin to cover it, Mark. Do you have any idea what you've done to me? How much you've destroyed?" Her voice softened, but the pain was evident in every word. "I thought we had a perfect life, a perfect story. I believed in us. But now I don't even know who you are anymore." Mark tried to reach out to her, but she recoiled again, the distance between them growing with each passing second. "Lila, please. I'll do anything to make this right. I know I messed up, but I love you. I never stopped loving you." "Love?" Lila spat, shaking her head in disbelief. "You don't do this to someone you love, Mark. You don't destroy their trust, their sense of safety, and then expect them to just forgive and forget. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. How can I, after everything?" The room fell silent, the weight of her words hanging heavy in the air. Mark stood there, helpless, as he realized the full extent of the damage he had caused. Lila, on the other hand, felt an overwhelming sense of loss. The man she had loved, the life they had built together, now felt like a lie, a cruel joke played at her expense. Finally, Lila spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need time, Mark. I don't know what happens next, but I can't just pretend that everything's okay. You've broken something inside me, something that might never heal." Mark nodded, tears brimming in his own eyes. He knew there was nothing more he could say to fix this, no words that could erase the pain he had caused. "I'll give you all the time you need. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right, if that's even possible." Lila didn't respond. She simply turned away, unable to look at him any longer. Mark lingered for a moment, hoping for some sign that things might be okay, but there was nothing. With a heavy heart, he picked up his duffel bag and left the room, leaving Lila alone with her shattered trust and broken dreams. As the door closed behind him, Lila sank back onto the couch, feeling the weight of her grief settle over her like a suffocating blanket. The life she thought she knew was gone, and in its place was a painful, uncertain reality that she wasn't sure she was strong enough to face. The sound of the front door creaking open snapped her out of her daze. Mark stepped inside, carrying the same duffel bag he had left with the night before. His expression was cheerful, almost as if nothing had happened. He hadn't noticed Lila's tear-streaked face or the tightness in her posture as she sat rigid on the couch. He tried to maintain the facade of normalcy, oblivious to the storm that was about to hit. "Hey babe, I'm back. It was a great trip. We caught so many fish, you wouldn't believe it," he said with forced enthusiasm, dropping the duffel bag by the door and walking towards her. He leaned in to kiss her, but she recoiled, turning her head away. Mark froze, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. "Lila, what's wrong?" Lila's eyes locked onto his, and in that moment, the dam holding back all her anger, hurt, and betrayal broke. Her voice, trembling with emotion, cut through the silence. "What's wrong? You want to know what's wrong, Mark. I know. I know everything." The color drained from Mark's face as he realized what she meant. His eyes darted around the room as if searching for an escape, but there was none. He was trapped, and he knew it. "Lila, I can explain—" "Explain?" Lila interrupted, her voice rising. "Explain what?" "How you've been lying to me for months? How you've been sneaking around with her while I've been sitting here trusting you? I found your phone, Mark. I saw the pictures, the messages. I know you were with her last night, not on some stupid fishing trip." Mark took a step back, his hands raised defensively. "Lila, please, just let me—" "No, you don't get to explain this away," Lila shouted, her voice cracking. Tears welled up in her eyes again, but she refused to let them fall. "You lied to me, Mark. You betrayed me. I gave you everything. And this is how you repay me? With lies and deceit?" Mark's shoulders slumped as the weight of his actions pressed down on him. He had no defense, no way to justify what he had done. He had betrayed the woman who loved him, and now he was watching that love crumble before his eyes. "I'm sorry, Lila. I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you." Lila let out a bitter laugh, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Sorry? You're sorry? That doesn't even begin to cover it, Mark. Do you have any idea what you've done to me? How much you've destroyed?" Her voice softened, but the pain was evident in every word. "I thought we had a perfect life, a perfect story. I believed in us, but now I don't even know who you are anymore." Mark tried to reach out to her, but she recoiled again, the distance between them growing with each passing second. "Lila, please. I'll do anything to make this right. I know I messed up, but I love you. I never stopped loving you." "Love?" Lila spat, shaking her head in disbelief. "You don't do this to someone you love, Mark. You don't destroy their trust, their sense of safety, and then expect them to just forgive and forget. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. How can I, after everything?" The room fell silent, the weight of her words hanging heavy in the air. Mark stood there, helpless, as he realized the full extent of the damage he had caused. Lila, on the other hand, felt an overwhelming sense of loss. The man she had loved, the life they had built together, now felt like a lie, a cruel joke played at her expense. Finally, Lila spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need time, Mark. I don't know what happens next, but I can't just pretend that everything's okay. You've broken something inside me, something that might never heal." Mark nodded, tears brimming in his own eyes. He knew there was nothing more he could say to fix this, no words that could erase the pain he had caused. "I'll give you all the time you need. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right, and if that's even possible." Lila didn't respond. She simply turned away, unable to look at him any longer. Mark lingered for a moment, hoping for some sign that things might be okay, but there was nothing. With a heavy heart, he picked up his duffel bag and left the room, leaving Lila alone with her shattered trust and broken dreams. As the door closed behind him, Lila sank back onto the couch, feeling the weight of her grief settle over her like a suffocating blanket. The life she thought she knew was gone, and in its place was a painful, uncertain reality that she wasn't sure she was strong enough to face. 2 years had passed since that fateful morning, but for Lila, the wounds still felt as raw as the day she discovered Mark's betrayal. Time had moved forward, but her heart remained trapped in that moment, unable to fully heal. The days that followed the confrontation were a blur of tears, anger, and confusion. There had been moments when she thought about leaving, packing her things, and walking away from the life they had built together, but each time something held her back, a lingering hope that maybe, just maybe, they could find a way through the pain. Mark had been relentless in his efforts to make amends. He apologized over and over, made promises to never hurt her again, and even suggested they go to couples therapy. They tried it all. The therapy sessions, the heart-to-heart conversations, the attempts to rekindle the romance that had once defined their relationship. Mark had cut off all contact with the other woman, sworn to be an open book with Lila, and worked tirelessly to regain her trust. Yet, despite his efforts, the past remained an ever-present shadow, looming over them both. For Lila, trust was no longer something that came naturally. It was something she had to fight for every single day. She found herself constantly checking Mark's phone when he wasn't around, her heart racing whenever he received a text message. The nightmares came frequently, vivid, gut-wrenching dreams where she would relive the moment of discovery, the betrayal crashing over her again and again. In these dreams, she could see the messages on the phone, hear the woman's voice, feel the cold sting of Mark's infidelity, as if it were happening in real time. And each time she woke up, drenched in sweat, she would be thrown back into the reality of their fractured marriage. There were days when things seemed almost normal, days when they would laugh together, go out for dinner, or simply sit in silence, enjoying each other's company. But even in those moments, the pain lingered beneath the surface, waiting for the smallest trigger to bring it rushing back. And then, there were the bad days. The days when Lila could barely look at Mark without feeling the sharp sting of betrayal, when the mere sight of his phone would send her spiraling into a state of anxiety and fear. One particularly difficult day came when Mark casually mentioned the idea of going on a boys' trip with some friends. The suggestion was innocent enough, just a weekend away to relax and unwind. But for Lila, it was like a bomb going off in her mind. The request brought back all the memories she had tried so hard to bury, the feelings of suspicion, betrayal, and devastation bubbling up to the surface. She felt as if she had been transported back to that night 2 years ago when she discovered the truth, and the pain hit her with the same intensity. Her reaction was immediate and visceral. Panic gripped her, and she found herself shaking uncontrollably, unable to stop the flood of emotions. Mark, noticing her distress, quickly backpedaled, assuring her that the trip wasn't important and that he didn't have to go. But the damage was already done. The mere mention of him being away, out of her sight, was enough to undo months of progress. Lila felt like she was back at square one, the pain fresh and raw as if the betrayal had just happened. The therapy sessions had helped to an extent. They had given her a space to voice her pain, to try and understand the deep-seated trust issues that now defined her relationship with Mark. Their therapist had been patient, guiding them through exercises meant to rebuild trust and improve communication. Mark had been earnest in his participation, desperate to do whatever it took to fix what he had broken. But Lila couldn't shake the feeling that something inside her had fundamentally changed. The security she once felt in their marriage was gone, replaced by a constant undercurrent of doubt and fear. At night, Lila would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind filled with questions she couldn't answer. Why had this happened to her? What had she done to deserve such betrayal? And most importantly, could she ever truly forgive Mark and move on? She knew that she still loved him, despite everything, that love had never really gone away. But it was a different kind of love now, tainted by the knowledge of what he had done, by the pain that still lingered in every corner of her heart. Mark, for his part, tried to be patient, understanding that Lila's healing process was something that couldn't be rushed, but Lila could see the toll it was taking on him too. He was carrying the guilt of his actions, the burden of knowing he had hurt the person he loved most in the world. He would often ask her if she was okay, if there was anything more he could do to help her feel safe again. But Lila didn't have the answers. All she knew was that the path to healing was long and uncertain, and she wasn't sure if she would ever reach the end. As the months turned into years, Lila found herself in a constant state of limbo. The nightmares and panic attacks lessened, but they never fully went away. Some days she would feel almost normal, almost like her old self. But then something, a phrase, a memory, a glance, would trigger the pain again, and she would be right back where she started. The love she had for Mark was still there, but it was buried beneath layers of hurt and mistrust. She couldn't help but wonder if things would ever truly be okay again, or if this was the new normal, the constant push and pull between love and pain, trust and betrayal. In quieter moments, when she was alone with her thoughts, Lila would reflect on everything that had happened. She knew she had a choice to make, either to find a way to let go of the past and fully commit to rebuilding their life together, or to accept that the damage was too great and walk away. But making that choice felt impossible. Every time she thought she was ready to move forward, the doubts would creep in, reminding her of the hurt, the lies, the shattered trust. And so, Lila continued to live in the aftermath of the betrayal, caught between the life she once had and the uncertain future that lay ahead. The pain was still there, as was the love. But whether or not they could coexist remained the question that haunted her every day. The evening air hung heavy with tension as Lila sat alone in the living room, her mind racing with thoughts she couldn't control. She had managed to hold it together when Mark first mentioned the trip, his words so casual and carefree, as if it were no different from any other weekend getaway with his friends. But now, as she sat there in the dim light, the weight of his suggestion pressed down on her chest like a boulder. The past 2 years had been a constant battle to regain some semblance of normalcy, to rebuild the trust that had been shattered by his betrayal. And, just when she thought she was making progress, this trip threatened to undo it all. Lila's fingers tightened around the edge of the couch cushion, her knuckles turning white as she tried to steady herself. She could hear Mark upstairs, the sound of his footsteps as he packed for the trip that, to him, was just a simple break from the routine. But to Lila, it was a reminder of the worst night of her life. The night she discovered his affair, the night her world came crashing down. She could still remember the gut-wrenching pain, the disbelief, the numbness that followed. And now, all those feelings were rushing back, as vivid and raw as if it had just happened. Mark's voice floated down the stairs, casual and light, as he called out, "Hey, Lila, have you seen my blue sweater? The one I like to wear when it's chilly out?" His tone was so normal, so unaware of the storm brewing inside her. Lila took a deep breath, trying to push down the rising tide of panic. She didn't want to let it show, didn't want him to see just how much his words had affected her. But she couldn't stop the thoughts, the doubts, the fears. What if this trip was just an excuse? What if he was lying again? What if, despite all his promises and apologies, he still couldn't be trusted? Finally, she forced herself to respond, her voice strained but steady. "I think it's in the laundry room." But as soon as the words left her mouth, she regretted it. Her voice had betrayed her, cracking just enough to reveal the turmoil she was trying so hard to hide. Mark came downstairs, the sweater in his hands, his brow furrowed as he looked at her. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. He could sense that something was off, that Lila wasn't her usual self. "You seem, I don't know, tense. Is something bothering you?" Lila's heart pounded in her chest as she looked up at him. She wanted to tell him the truth, to let him know just how much his words had hurt her, how they had dredged up all the pain she thought she had buried. But at the same time, she didn't want to seem irrational, didn't want to push him away with her insecurities. So instead, she forced a small smile and shook her head. "No, I'm fine. Just tired, I guess." But Mark wasn't convinced. He knew her too well, knew that something was eating away at her. He sat down beside her, reaching out to take her hand. "Lila, if something's bothering you, you can tell me. You don't have to pretend everything's okay if it's not." His words, his touch, should have been comforting, but they only made the panic rise higher in her chest. She pulled her hand away, her voice trembling as she spoke. "It's just the trip. I know it's stupid, but I can't help it. Every time you talk about going away, I get this feeling, like something bad is going to happen, like you're going to—" She couldn't finish the sentence, the words catching in her throat. Mark's expression softened, and he reached out again, this time cupping her face in his hands. Lila, I'm not going anywhere. I mean it. I promised you I'd never hurt you again, and I stand by that. If this trip is too much for you, I won't go. It's not worth it if it's going to cause you this much pain. Tears welled up in Lila's eyes as she looked at him, her heart torn between wanting to believe him and the lingering doubts that refused to let go. But what if something happens? What if you change your mind? What if you meet someone and stop? Mark interrupted gently, his voice firm but kind. I'm not going to meet someone else. I'm not going to change my mind. I love you, Lila. I'm committed to us, to making this work. I know I messed up. And I know it's going to take time for you to trust me again, but I'm not giving up on us. I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. Lila wanted to believe him, wanted to feel the security and trust that had once been the foundation of their relationship. But the pain of his betrayal had left scars that were still too fresh, too deep. She nodded slowly, not trusting herself to speak, afraid that if she did, the floodgates would open and she wouldn't be able to stop the tears. Mark sighed, pulling her into his arms, holding her close as she trembled against him. We'll get through this, Lila. I promise. I'm not going anywhere. But as she clung to him, Lila couldn't shake the fear that something would go wrong, that this trip would be the beginning of the end. The memories of the past were too strong, too vivid, and they whispered to her that history had a way of repeating itself. And so, even as she held on to Mark, she felt a cold, creeping sense of dread settle in her chest, reminding her that the wounds of betrayal were far from healed in the quiet of the night. After the tension of the day had subsided, Lila found herself alone in the dimly lit living room. The soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant creak of the house settling were the only sounds breaking the silence. Mark had gone to bed hours ago, after an emotionally charged conversation that had left them both drained. Though he had canceled the trip to soothe her anxieties, the relief was bittersweet. The deeper issues remained unresolved, and Lila felt an overwhelming sadness settling over her. Sitting on the edge of the couch, Lila's thoughts swirled with the day's events. The idea of Mark going away had triggered a torrent of old wounds. Despite his reassurances, her mind kept replaying the pain from 2 years ago, the betrayal, the lies, and the crushing disappointment. The more she tried to suppress her fears, the more they seemed to control her. The trust she once had in their relationship felt like a distant memory, replaced by an ever-present anxiety that she couldn't escape. Feeling the weight of her emotions, Lila decided she needed to face the pain rather than letting it fester. She couldn't keep living in this state of constant fear and uncertainty. She needed to be honest about her feelings and confront the reality of her situation. The healing process wasn't just about Mark's actions. It was about her own journey to reclaim her peace of mind. With a deep breath, Lila made her way to the bedroom where Mark was asleep. The sight of him, peaceful and unaware of the turmoil within her, stirred a mix of love and sorrow in her heart. She lay down beside him, the familiar warmth of his presence both comforting and painful. As she stared up at the ceiling, the heaviness of her thoughts was almost unbearable. Mark stirred, and, sensing her unrest, turned to face her. "Lila, what's wrong?" he asked, his voice thick with concern. He reached out, placing a comforting hand on her arm, but Lila struggled to articulate the storm of emotions swirling inside her. After a moment of hesitation, Lila spoke softly, her voice filled with vulnerability. "Mark, I need to talk. I've been trying so hard to move past what happened, but I'm still struggling. I feel like every time you mention going away, all my fears come rushing back. It's like I'm reliving the pain all over again, and it's consuming me." Mark's face reflected both concern and sadness as he listened. He moved closer, his touch gentle and reassuring. "I'm so sorry, Lila," he said quietly. "I understand that this is hard for you, and I know I've hurt you deeply. I want to help you through this, but I can't do it alone. I need you to be honest with me about what you're feeling, and we need to work through this together." Lila's tears began to flow freely as she continued. "I don't know how to move on from this. Every time I think we're making progress, something happens and I'm back to square one. I love you, but the trust we had is gone, and it's so hard to rebuild it. I'm afraid that no matter what you do, it won't be enough." Mark pulled her into a tight embrace, his voice filled with determination. We will get through this, Lila. I know it's going to take time and patience, and I'm committed to being here for you every step of the way. I'll do whatever it takes to rebuild the trust we lost, even if it means taking things one day at a time. Lila clung to him, feeling the warmth of his embrace, but the lingering fear remained. The journey ahead was uncertain, and while she wanted to believe that they could overcome this, the scars of betrayal were still fresh. They both knew that healing wouldn't come easily, but they were willing to face the challenge together, determined to find a way forward, despite the pain. In the quiet of the night, they held each other, sharing the burden of their struggle. The path to healing was still unclear, but for now they found solace in their shared commitment to rebuilding their relationship. The road ahead would be long and fraught with obstacles, but Lila and Mark were ready to confront it together, hoping that love and honesty would guide them through the